All right, so here we are in the sagebrush flats of the West. This is Black Mountain, just on the northeast side of a town called Craig, Colorado. As the mule deer buck walks down the slopes on his way to the wintering grounds out of the mountains, the sun's going to be shining down from the right, illuminating some of these distant sagebrush-covered hillsides as it trickles on back up towards the blue mountains where we might have a few specks of snow, just some small, subtle details. And I'm going to work on this section right through here today, as well as right over in here. And then hopefully tonight get into this foreground where we're going to have some large sagebrush details, some grass, just some really neat foliage. And I'm going to show you how I do that. But for right now, I'm going to get started with these distant hillsides. And we're not going to have much texture because this is going to be, I suppose the mountains might be 4, 5, 6, 7 miles away, possibly further, maybe 10 from this vantage point. So I've got some white and I've got some phthalo blue and some cerulean blue, just a touch of phthalo blue. And I'm going to need some black because when we're painting landscapes, you want to really avoid very strong and saturated colors. You're going to want to try to get things to be more subtle than not. So I'm going to add, it's pretty diluted down with some white and then a touch of black. And that's going to get it towards the gray scale. And I'm going to just test that over the top of what we have here already. And I can see that that's going to be almost a perfect match. It's a bit more gray, but that's good. I would rather have it more gray than more blue. And some mountains can be pretty darn blue, but I want them to not quite overpower our deer in the foreground here. So I want them to be somewhat subtle. So I've just got this color and one of my favorite round blender brushes. I'm just going to scrub some of this color on. I want a good coat. We've already got a layer, but we're going to add another layer on top here of the same color. Just continue that over on this side. Now, throughout this whole process in the background, I'm not going to be worried about the bottom edge. I'm only worried about the top, because as we move down, we're going to work from the top and onward down. And when we move downwards, we're going to be finalizing the details on the upper side of whatever we're working on, and then continuing to work down. So the downside is going to be, the underside here is going to be pretty rough at times, and then we'll have to just rework that as we move down, just making sure that what we're leaving above has a nice finished result. And we're not going to be focused on a lot of detail, so I'm going to start with using this nice round brush here. And we won't get into things like a liner brush quite yet. I may use just a smaller version. This is a double thick filbert, pretty round itself. That's good for maybe some small details in here, but we want things to be very soft until we get to probably somewhere in here. And that's going to create the illusion that things are really far up, because we can't see much detail at all. I think a lot of mistakes, a lot of artist mistakes is they try to add, and I've been guilty of this in the past, they add too much detail as you get further back. Let that detail be really smooth. Don't add it until you get downward, somewhere right down in here. And that's when you're going to start to see it, when things are maybe 100 yards away from us. This, we're talking miles out, so just really soft textures. Now, the blue is essentially trees. And we're going to take some raw sienna, some red, some white, a touch of black because we want things to be moving towards gray. Rather have them be more gray than more color, if that makes sense. So we'll see what that is. That's kind of a pinkish. I think we could probably tone that back even more so towards the grayscale. Red, touch of raw sienna. Just a good mixture for distant hillsides. Probably could add some more white to that. That's pretty good. So I like that color. I'm trying to follow what the actual mountain looks like. So I'm kind of going back and forth here from a photograph of the mountain. But we don't have the color scheme. Photo was taken during the day. The sun's pretty much straight up above us. So we're going to try to create the illusion that it's more of like an early morning scene. So that's why we've got more of a pinkish hue. And it's not necessary to be exact. I like creating more representational things. Just keeps it less stressful, more fun to paint. And it'll still end up looking like the correct mountainside. So we're just adding, this is a very subtle tone, really nice warm tone. Now, as I said with our smaller brush, we're just going to take that same color and we're going to take this smaller brush here, just sort of dab on some more subtle details, smaller details. That's really all there is to it. Of course, when we get into the snow, we may want an even smaller brush because that snow is going to be pretty sharp. It's going to stick out very well, so we're going to have some sharp lines. And a brush I would probably use for that is a round brush with a not quite a pointed tip. It's got a softer tip, pretty small round brush. And we're going to take some white and we're just going to mix some white into our mixture. So it's kind of an off-white, not a bright white, a little bit off. Look at that, just teeny tiny textures. Very subtle. And man, I don't even know if I want things to be that bright. That might be too bright. I think we could just tone it back. There we go. Just a hair. And then what we'll do is we'll start adding more snow patches up higher. Very light pressure. Got some moisture in there just to keep it flowing. A lot of this looks like it can be fairly random, but there's a few spots we want to be in the right spot, the right place, so that we can kind of recognize the mountainside. That's all there is, just teeny tiny spots of snow. So I'll keep working at this. This is going to take, I suppose, several hours as I poke at this. If you've watched my past lessons, what I want you to understand is it's the same process. Same thing as a 1 or 2 hour painting. It's just very, very slow, very tedious. And the longer that I take my time, the more realism I can bring out. So I will zoom in the camera and just continue to poke away. And we'll work down through here, and it'll really get fun when we get into the foliage, and that's really what this lesson is about, is working on building up a realistic plant. So we get to work on here, and we'll come back into this section right down in here. So I've sort of left this distant hillside just right through here a bit unfinished because I might spill some of this sagebrush up into it. And we're going to add some larger bushes through here. We're going to add some grass, some foliage, a little bit of dirt in between. And I want to bring out a lot of color because I still don't know yet how much color I want towards the background, especially up into the sky as well. But this is going to help me determine that because this is going to be our most saturated area, is right close to the viewer in the foreground. And now when we're thinking, this goes for any foliage, but when we're thinking about, say, the sage bushes themselves, or even grass, you want to think about what's behind it, what's underneath, and that's going to be the shadows, that's going to be the dirt. So we want to lay in our shadows and our dirt before we lay in the leaves of the sagebrush and the highlights. So what I'm going to do is take just some black, probably just take some black. I'm going to start by imagining the bushes here, thinking about what is going to be underneath. Now this doesn't have to be any more thought out other than some blobs of black. And you can see I've got kind of some dirt color. I'm going to basically just repaint some of this color too with just some burnt sienna, some black, maybe a bit of white. I want to gray it down, mute it down just a bit. So I'm just going to keep going with this black, just laying in some black. And when I finish with the black, we'll start by adding some branches. We'll start by adding some rocks. Just a few things to add that next layer, and we'll take it from there. So we've got all this black laid in here, and I've added some gray in between our black clumps. Then I took an old brush, and I even took a sponge, just dabbed some more black, just to add some like speckled black texture through here. And a lot of that might get covered up by the grass, but it's just a good start just to get some random texture down that just kind of adds to it. So what we're going to do to get started with the sagebrush is I'm going to work on the very top of this little ridge line here and add sagebrush just along the edge. And then after that is finished, we're going to work on getting some grass through here, and then we'll work on these bigger sagebrush clumps before we add the final touches. So I've got two brushes, and one is a very old flat brush, a lot of frayed hairs, just a lot of randomness into it. Another one was kind of made that way. This one is a grainer, so it's kind of cut very uniquely, and there's a lot of just single hairs that pop up, so it's good for creating those nice thin lines. We just want something that takes little work out of our hands, so this is going to go much faster by having something like this rather than taking a liner brush and doing it detail by detail. Now with our sagebrush, kind of gives off, sagebrush is kind of a turquoise hue, but we don't want a lot of that because we want the glow of the sun to kind of overpower that. So we are going to grab some blue, but not much, just a tiny bit. We'll add that to some orange and then mix it in with some white. So we want this to be kind of a brighter, colorful color, and I'm going to test this. Now that's pretty good. So I'm going to grab some water on this round brush, Just kind of mix it in to the paint. And now I'm going to I'll start with our flat brush, just kind of see how that's going to go, and I'm going to drag it through that color, kind of get it tapped on there. We're just going to add, little by little, some of these brighter orange, perhaps greener highlights. Very simple. And we could take our other brush here, grab some of that same paint. That might work. I like this brush better for this purpose. You got to test your brushes out. That's another good point. A good piece of advice is grab several brushes to start and see what each one's going to do for you. Because when we want to create texture for a certain piece of foliage, a certain kind of bush, maybe grass, it's good to experiment in the beginning. You just kind of feel it out. And in this case, I think I'm preferring using this grainer brush over that old flat brush. So I'm going to go along the edge here. And it starts out, just like a lot of this painting, it starts out very subtle. But you can see that this is more saturated through here than the hill behind it. So I'm going to continue to just add these highlights just on the top. And then once we finish with those highlights, what I'm going to do is grab some blue, because of course when we get out of the sun and we get into more of perhaps some of the shaded area of these bushes, that blue is going to show up. So maybe on the back side, just like this bush here, or maybe down low. We want some detail just out of the sunlight, just down low near the ground. And so I'm just going to tap on this fine texture. I'm going to be very deliberate, I'm going to be very controlled, and just have some patience. Just fill this horizon line with some texture. Little bush right there. Little bush right there. That's really all there is to creating any kind of foliage. Just build up the texture and instill patience in the process. Well, I'm pretty happy with what I have started here. I think the blues complement these warm highlights very well. I like the overall color of this so far. I think you've seen that. You can see right here I've started to begin to add some more detail, added some grass with the liner brush, and I'm going to continue to do that, just adding grass around these dark areas, and then I'm also going to start adding branches in those dark areas itself. We're not going to add, I'm not going to add any more of the leaves or the flowers of the plants until I have all of the detail underneath, and that's going to include the rocks and the dirt, the grass, and then the branches in the black areas. So I'll show you a bit what I've got started here. Just have blue, cerulean blue, black, touch of black, and some white. And the reason that I'm painting this so blue right now, why the grass is so blue, is because I want there to be I want the grass to have the effect of the blue sky is reflecting its light off of these grasses in the shadows, and that's going to give it kind of a blue hue. So I'm just adding these clumps of grass. Now this is in the fall, so these grasses are going to be pretty dried up, curled over. And you'll notice how I'm not staying in one spot, and I'm going to bounce all over the foreground pretty much at an even pace, just adding one clump of grass at a time and then moving on to the next area. And the reason I want to do that is because, at least for myself, and I think this is a good tip if you struggle with this as well, or have in the past like I did, if we focus on one area and we just start adding all of these clumps of grass, and this goes with any painting and really any objects where you're going to have a lot of them, maybe a bunch of trees. If I start by adding a lot of clumps of grass all together right here, I might move over to here and continue to do so because that's what we've done here. And then maybe when I get to here, I'll start to realize maybe I added too much grass. And so this is just sort of a good personal control, a check for myself by bouncing sporadically across the foreground rather than focusing on one area. I'm going to slowly build one clump of grass at a time, and that way I can see everything developing at the same time rather than one area. It's just going to give me a bit better perspective of how this grass is looking in the foreground, and then that's going to help me determine how much I would like to have in the foreground. So that's just a good way that I've learned to control myself from adding too much of any one thing. And you notice I don't really think about laying these grasses down much. I just kind of go for it. And whatever comes up, I just let it be. I think a lot of randomness is really good, especially in a detailed foreground such as this. So I just kind of go with the flow, let the brush do the work, and just see what happens. And if I don't like it, I can paint over it. And sometimes I go down with the brush. Sometimes I sweep it around this way. Sometimes I go up and create some broken ones. Okay, now I don't want to overdo that. We've got a good start. We've got some grass, and you can see things start to take shape. It starts to get a bit interesting right now. What I want to do next is, might think about some dirt. I'm going to take burnt sienna, some black, and some white. I'm going to get a pretty dark mixture. It's mostly gray, some burnt sienna. And I'm just going to tap the brush on, just dragging the tip right across the surface. And grab some more. Maybe I want to go this direction. And maybe downwards. Maybe I'll just tap it. And we could roll it. Drag it down. Bring it up like that. And maybe I don't like that line. I can just wipe it off. Just like that. We've left that little bit here. So we just want, you can see that there's no real special trick. I'm just dragging paint, letting some of the canvas do its work. I'm just building a nice fine texture with this gray burnt sienna. Giving the appearance of maybe some specks of dirt, maybe some small pebbles, some rocks. We don't know. Maybe some old dried and dead foliage. Just dragging them around, really random. It's a very relaxing way to paint dirt. I'm just tapping it on. Look how I tap it now with a little bit of paint left on the brush. Just tap it, and some of that texture of the canvas just picks that right up. Now it's a little brighter, but I think that's okay. And we're just going to build dirt just like this, all over. And if we want to get a bit creative, we can take, this is a sponge, natural sponge. You can buy these packs of sponges most places, most art stores, craft stores for sure, even Walmart, something simple like that. So we could look for a nice edge. I kind of like the texture right there. And we could just take our sponge. I'm going to get some water. It's good to wet the sponge down. Keeps the paint flowing, just like the brush. Get some water on that sponge, and then I'm just going to tap it in that same color. And just tap it on. You can see a couple things showed up there. I think I need more paint. Grab some more. So we can just take this. You see how that just goes on really easy. Creates kind of cool textures. Very random. That's what I like. So here's another great way to add some texture. The appearance of some stones, some dirt, just some random mess sitting on the prairie. So we might add some more texture using one of those two methods. And then the last thing is we're going to need some branches in our dark areas. And the branches are just going to be the same color as our grass. We might pick up some burnt sienna as well. Just a nice gray tone, a little blue, a little burnt sienna, and we'll just go up, curve around, just make up some branches. And then they go back this way. There's a branch there. It's really important not to think much about these branches, especially with a plant that has a lot of leaves. There's going to be a lot of this covered. We'll just see bits and pieces of it. So I'm not concerned about how I'm laying in these branches whatsoever. I just want something there just to look at once we get foliage around it. Now, as I continue to work at this, I'm going to start adding white to the colors that I'm mixing here with the blue. And I'm going to start to add brighter colored grasses over the top of what I have already done. And we'll use the same brighter color to add some highlights to these branches. And basically, I want to build up layers of grass, layers of sticks, and that's going to give it more of a three-dimensional look. I like having layers, different dimensions, especially in detailed foreground like this. And I'll poke at this for a while, and I think when I add some of the foliage, some of the leaves, we'll slope back down. I'll talk a little bit more about adding some of the same foliage but a lot bigger right up front here. All right, so I'm pretty happy with what I've got going so far. That's a good amount of texture. It's enough to get me started. And once I add these bushes of sagebrush, I can add more details in between. But for right now, there's a pretty fair amount of detail actually right now. So we're gonna move on to the leaves and the flowers of these bushes. And we might add a couple other species of plants here as well, but I'm going to take some white and yellow and black. Let's see what that looks like. That's not bad. I like that color actually. It's a nice warm color, kind of that greenish hue. And just like that, how easy it is to to make this foliage. Just using a clever brush. You just got to find a good brush that works for you. Like I said, this can work for just about any type of foliage. You see how once we start covering up these branches, suddenly the branches that I added become very subtle. You hardly don't notice them at all, but it's just a good extra dimension to add. Something easy, but it adds a lot. So I'm going to spend a good chunk of time here just adding these little leaves. I'm going to add the leaves, and then what I'm going to do after I add the leaves is we want to add the flowers. And the flowers, I'm trying to mix an orange here. The flowers are going to be a pretty good orange tone. They're going to be fairly neutral in the shade, but where that sun hits, and I could probably adjust these colors here by just adding a more saturated orange over the top here. I'll just give a few hints to these bushes out here, but just like this, I'm going to add some flowers. And in the fall, they dry to kind of an orange tone. So I don't think I can go too orange. I think a good bright orange is going to work well. And I could even grab, I'm trying to mix the color, but I could even grab some cadmium orange. Just mix that with white. That's going to be more vibrant. Yeah, that'll probably work better. And I'll add some orange flowers just sporadically to the top of the bushes. So I'm going to make the same bushes just like I did up along the horizon, but I'm going to make them much bigger. Just continuing to add these leaves and then the flowers on top. I'm sure into it right now. Just a lot of details. A lot of time. Kind of relaxing though. Just over and over. So I'm adding this blue, and it's going to act as kind of the shadow of these bushes, the shaded area of these leaves. And I think I want to, speaking of which, while I'm doing the same thing, I've decided I've wanted to have more blue. I've got some different types of blue here, phthalo blue, some primary cyan, just trying to get that very saturated and vibrant. I think I want to have some more blue on these pieces of grass as well. So I'm just going to start touching up some of these areas of grass, especially in the clumps, and just trying to saturate those blues. I don't like to have a lot of color contrast just right up front, way up close. Kind of adds to the whole picture. Things always get more vibrant as they get closer to the eyes, so I'm just going to try to include more color here in the foreground. And as I'm doing this blue, I know we've got this burnt sienna on the ground, but I'm thinking that I could probably darken some of that area. I just think I'm losing some contrast. I'll just mix some black along with some phthalo blue, and I might just, if I really water it down, just add a whole bunch of water in there. It's very thin. It'll be more like a glaze, and that's going to make things look a little bit deeper. And I'm probably going to just lightly buff this in around some of these clumps of grass. Just adds more shadows. I think things are going to want to be more broken up, really close, right up front here. I just think there's too much going on. But it's a fairly minor adjustment, just darker shadows. Just like that. Pretty simple. Could be some more darker areas further back here as well, just not quite as wide of an area. Want them to be a little bit thinner. It's going to look like they're further away. So things like that. And I'm getting really close. I could start doing it on some of them, adding the flower. And that's going to be basically just white and orange, cat orange. What's tough about the flowers is getting them to be vibrant enough where they really stand out against everything else, because that stuff is so vibrant. So it might be a good idea to perhaps finish some of these areas up, touch them up when the painting's finished with some oil paint, because you just can't beat the glow that you can achieve with oils. So I may end up doing some oil paint just to enhance some of these colors. It's hard to get these colors bright enough, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And many of you probably understand that quite well. So I might have to do that in this painting. But this is going along really nicely. It's coming together how I'd hoped, and just going to keep plugging away at it. Oh boy, well, I think I'm getting close. It's been a long time coming, just tedious process, and right now I'm starting to add some of those final touches, the details that bring out kind of the best in everything. And I've got this really tiny script type of brush, pointed filbert, it's what it's called. It's just a really tiny pointed brush, and I'm trying to create a few blades of grass. I think I could poke at this for quite a while. It's just a matter of when it's time to be done or not. That is the question. And it's a challenge to call something finished and move on. But just like with the rest of this, especially up in the sky, if I move on to the next thing, which is going to be the deer, I think I'll have a better idea of whether if it's finished or if I could add some more detail to it. So it's very close. It's just a struggle of knowing when to set the brush down. But just adding simple blades of grass, very, very thin. Pretty easy stuff. I like having some bigger pieces up front. Just kind of adds to that depth. Looks like things are really close. Do a big one right there. Just a couple, maybe another one right there. And the last thing I may do with this foreground is if I get some primary cyan, it's a good color to glaze. It's just so powerful. Grab some primary cyan, mix a ton of water in it so we've got it really transparent. You see how that just goes on? Just a touch of the brush and everything just pops with a whole bunch of blue. And so I think this kind of enhances by just oversaturating these colors right against the bottom. That's just going to increase that appearance of things being closer. We want them very saturated right near the bottom. And that goes with some of the other foliage as well. It becomes difficult with grass. You've almost got to use a liner brush and just follow the blade of grass and glaze it. But man, you can get really picky with this. I think we're just about there. I'm just wiping off some of that. Well, I'm pretty happy with how this is coming together so far. I think those vibrant and saturated colors that I've been adding to the foreground is really helping to add depth to the painting overall. And now I'm excited to get to work on the deer itself. I might add a couple more does behind the buck just to make it a bit more interesting. And that'll be on the next video. The next episode, number 10, I believe, we'll dive into the deer itself and talk about how I paint the fur. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out my free print giveaway if you haven't already, as well as my eBay auctions and my website if you'd like to support my channel. All those links can be found in the description below. Until next time, we'll see you on another episode of Paint Like a Pro.